A tormented millionaire lost his faith after firing 39 nannies in just 1 month. None could fill the void left by the tragedy that paralyzed his children and silenced his home, until a new caregiver arrives, with no diplomas or promises, only a heart willing to stay. What she does next not only brings movement back to the children, but awakens something his money could never buy: hope. The rain beat against the panoramic windows of the mansion in Bel Air as Jessica crossed the entrance hall for the last time. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small suitcase where she had hastily packed her personal belongings. She was the 39th. 39 women in just 30 days, each of them with impeccable credentials, proven experience, and references that shone on paper. And each of them had failed. The butler, Mr. Alfred, a man in his late 50s with perfectly combed grey hair, escorted Jessica to the main door without a word. There was no need. She already knew. Everyone knew. This house had become a tomb of impossible expectations. When the door closed, silence once again dominated the Italian marble corridors. Edward Sinclair watched from his second-floor office window as the taxi carried away another employee. He felt no remorse. He felt nothing but the emptiness that had settled in his chest since that day at sea, 6 months ago. Mr. Alfred knocked discreetly on the office door. Edward didn't answer, but the butler entered anyway. He had worked for the Sinclair family for over 20 years. He had known this man since he was an ambitious young entrepreneur, long before the fortune, long before the tragedy. The youngest Sinclair son had never been one to follow the traditional path. While his brothers managed the family's mining businesses, Edward built his own empire in the tech sector. At 38, his software company had revolutionized the American financial market. He was known for his precision, his analytical mind, his ability to turn numbers into opportunities, but none of that mattered now. "Mr. Sinclair, the agency called a short while ago. There is a candidate available for tomorrow morning," Alfred said, maintaining the professional tone that characterized his every word. Edward continued to stare out the window, watching the lights of Los Angeles switch on as night fell. "Send her over," he replied in a monotone voice. The same answer he had given 39 times before. Alfred hesitated. "Sir, if I may, perhaps it's time to consider a different approach." The children need the best possible care, Alfred," Edward interrupted, finally turning around. His dark eyes carried a weight that made the butler instinctively step back. "Send her over in the morning." When he was alone again, Edward sank into the leather armchair behind the mahogany desk. On the flawless surface, there was only a picture frame turned face down and piles of reports he could no longer read. His company continued to run. His partner Marcus handled the daily operations, but Edward had become a ghost in his own life. Upstairs, in the modified bedroom where Leo and Noah spent their days, a nurse was finishing the evening routine. The 2 hospital beds had replaced the colorful bunk beds that once occupied the space. The walls still displayed superhero drawings, but now they seemed to mock reality. 2 pediatric wheelchairs waited silently by the window. Leo and Noah had just turned 4 when the accident happened. Identical twins with the same brown eyes as their mother and the dark hair of their father. Before, they were impossible to tell apart, always running, always laughing, always together. Now silence had become their common language. The nurse, Mrs. Eleanor, a robust woman who had cared for dozens of children throughout her career, adjusted the blankets and checked their vital signs. The boys stared at the ceiling unblinking, unspeaking. She had already tried lullabies, toys, stories. Nothing elicited a reaction. "Good night, my angels," she whispered before leaving, knowing she would not receive a reply. That night, Edward didn't sleep. He never slept. He would stay in his office reviewing security cameras, watching the empty hallways, the nurses making their rounds, the silent rooms where his children existed but did not live. Sometimes he would open the drawer where he kept the picture frame of Caroline, his wife. He would glance at that radiant smile, at the eyes full of life, and close the drawer again. It was all he could bear. The morning arrived with the grey sky typical of Los Angeles in winter. Alfred supervised breakfast in the mansion's industrial kitchen, though he knew Edward wouldn't come down to eat. He never sat at the dining room table anymore. The place where Caroline used to host elegant dinners, where the family gathered on Sundays, had become just another abandoned room. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Alfred crossed the entrance hall, his footsteps echoing on the cold marble. When he opened the door, he found a woman of about 30, wearing a worn-out brown wool coat and carrying a small old fabric suitcase. There was no Uber waiting at the gate, no taxi. She had arrived by bus, walking the last few blocks to the mansion. "Abigail Evans," she said simply, extending her hand firmly. "But you can call me Abby." Alfred noticed her calloused hands, her short, clean nails, her upright posture despite her simple clothes. There was something different about her. The other nannies had arrived in private cars, with designer luggage, their resumes printed on glossy paper. This woman carried only the essentials. "Please come in." "Miss Abigail sent by the agency?" Alfred asked, closing the door behind her. "Yes, I was." Abby looked around the immense hall, observing the crystal chandeliers, the double marble staircases, the works of art on the walls. She showed no sign of being impressed or uncomfortable. She just observed with attentive, serene eyes. Alfred led her to the adjacent living room. "Please, wait here. Mr. Sinclair will see you shortly." He hesitated before continuing. "I must inform you of the house rules." Abby sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. "The children follow a strict medical protocol," Alfred began, pulling a paper from his inner jacket pocket. "Physical therapy at 9, occupational therapy at 11, a session with the child psychologist at 3 in the afternoon. Meals must be balanced according to the nutritionist's instructions, baths with the nurse's assistance, medication at the exact times. Mr. Sinclair reviews the security cameras daily. Any deviation from the protocol will result in immediate dismissal." Abby just nodded. "Yes, sir," Alfred continued. "The children do not speak. They do not respond to verbal stimuli. They show no emotion. The doctors describe the condition as simultaneous emotional and physical paralysis. They are trapped in both body and mind. Your function will be to assist the nurses and strictly follow the therapeutic guidelines." "I understand," Abby said in a calm voice. 39 professionals have been dismissed in the last month," the butler went on, his tone lower now. "Mr. Sinclair has extremely high standards. He does not tolerate mistakes. He does not tolerate deviations. He does not tolerate empty promises." "I won't make any promises," Abby replied, finally looking directly into Alfred's eyes. "I will just do my job." Something in the simplicity of that answer made the butler pause. He had heard the others boast about their revolutionary techniques, their years of experience, their past successes. They had all promised miracles. They had all failed. This woman promised nothing. Perhaps that was why she might last longer than a day. Edward came down the stairs 20 minutes later. He was dressed in a flawless dark suit, but the unshaven beard and deep dark circles under his eyes betrayed his lack of sleep. When he entered the room, Abby stood up. "Abigail Evans," she said, not offering her hand this time, just a respectful nod. Edward examined her with critical eyes. "Your credentials," he demanded. Abby opened her worn-out suitcase and took out a thin folder. Inside there were only 3 documents: a certificate of completion for a technical course in childcare, an up-to-date vaccination record, and 2 handwritten letters of reference. No university degrees, no specializations from renowned institutions, nothing that would impress. Edward flipped through the papers with an increasingly stern expression. "The agency sent you?" he asked, his tone laced with disbelief. "They did, sir. I know my qualifications are not the most impressive, but I am punctual, dedicated, and I follow instructions." "Where did you work previously?" "I cared for children in an orphanage in Bakersfield for 5 years. Abby maintained her steady gaze. "Then I helped families in difficult situations around the metropolitan area." Edward tossed the papers back on the table. "Do you know how many nannies I've dismissed this month?" 39, sir. And yet the agency sends me someone with minimal qualifications." He crossed his arms. "Why should I give you a chance I denied to far more qualified professionals?" "You shouldn't," Abby said simply. "But I'm here, and I can start now if you'll allow me." The direct answer, without pleas or arguments, caught Edward by surprise. He was used to people trying to impress him, convince him, promise impossible results. This woman just accepted reality as it was. "Did Alfred inform you of the rules?" Edward asked. "He did. And you understand that any mistake, any deviation, any failure will result in immediate dismissal?" "I understand." Edward observed this simple woman, with her worn-out coat and her old suitcase. Part of him wanted to dismiss her immediately, but another part, a small distant part that still remembered what it was like to feel curiosity, wanted to see what would happen. "Alfred, show her to the boys' room." Edward turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You have until the end of the day," he said without looking back. Abby followed the butler up the marble stairs, observing the family portraits that still adorned the walls. Edward and Caroline on their wedding day radiant. Edward, Caroline, and the newborn twins, the boys taking their first steps, a family frozen in time before everything fell apart. When Alfred opened the door to the modified room, Abby entered and saw Leo and Noah for the first time. The twins were sitting in wheelchairs by the window, looking out without really seeing. Their small bodies seemed even smaller in the medical chairs. They wore identical light blue pajamas, their dark hair in need of a trim, their eyes as empty as frozen lakes. Mrs. Eleanor, the nurse, was organizing medications on a tray. She looked at Abby with a mixture of pity and skepticism. Another one, she thought. Another one who won't even last until lunch. Abby said nothing. She just placed her old suitcase in the corner of the room, took off her worn-out coat, and folded it carefully over a chair. Then, for the first time in 6 months, someone entered that room without immediately trying to interact with the children, without forcing smiles or empty words of encouragement. She simply stood there observing in silence, and something in the heavy air of the room began, imperceptibly, to change. Abby's first few days in the mansion were marked by silence. She didn't try to talk to Leo and Noah. She didn't force games. She didn't make promises of improvement or whisper words of encouragement that sounded hollow even to adults. She simply existed in the same space as them, a constant and serene presence. Mrs. Eleanor watched everything with suspicion. She had seen many different approaches in recent weeks. There was the nanny who arrived with bags full of expensive educational toys, believing the right stimuli would make the boys react. She lasted 3 hours. There was the one who tried music therapy, playing a guitar and singing children's songs far too loudly. She was gone before lunch. There was the one who insisted on aggressive physical therapy exercises, thinking she could force physical progress. Edward dismissed her personally after seeing the silent tears in the boy's eyes, but this Abby was different. She moved through the room like water, flowing around the furniture, the wheelchairs, the children, without disturbing anything. When she folded blankets, she did it with an almost reverent attention, as if every gesture had meaning. When she arranged the forgotten toys in the corners of the room, she placed them in specific spots, always within the children's line of sight, but without forcing interaction. On the 3rd day, Alfred found Abby in the living room during her break. She was cleaning the picture frames that decorated the fireplace mantel. There were at least 15 photographs there, all framed in polished silver, all showing moments of a family that no longer existed, all covered in a thin layer of dust that no one had dared to touch. Abby held a soft cloth and cleaned each frame with delicate care. It wasn't her job. The regular housekeepers had been ordered not to touch those frames, but there she was, removing the dust from each frozen memory. "Miss Abigail," Alfred began, his voice tense. "Mr. Sinclair left specific instructions about—" "I know," Abby interrupted gently, without stopping her work. "But memories shouldn't gather dust. They deserve to be honored, not hidden." Alfred opened his mouth to argue, but something in the way she held that portrait of Caroline made him pause. There was respect there, not morbid curiosity, not an invasion of privacy, just a silent acknowledgement that the woman in the photograph had been loved and still was. On the 4th floor, Edward watched everything on the security cameras. He saw Abby clean the frames. He saw Alfred watch her and then retreat without a word. He should have been furious. He should have gone down immediately and dismissed her for disobeying an implicit order. But he couldn't. Something about that simple scene touched a part of him he had buried 6 months ago. Caroline always said that people showed who they were in the small gestures. It was in the unnoticeable details that true nature was revealed. Edward remembered when he met her 10 years ago at a tech conference in San Jose. She was a pediatrician, there to present a telemedicine project for underserved communities. He was impressed not by the brilliant presentation, but by the way she stopped in the hallway to help a waiter who had dropped a tray. Everyone else just walked by, but Caroline knelt and helped pick up the broken glass, speaking softly to the embarrassed young man. Edward closed his eyes and pushed the memory away. He couldn't allow himself to remember. Remembering hurt too much. That afternoon during the physical therapy session, Abby watched from the doorway as the therapist, Patricia, worked with Leo. The movements were mechanical, technical, efficient. Patricia moved the boy's legs in specific patterns, counting aloud, following the established protocol. Leo stared at the ceiling, unblinking, as if he weren't really there. When the session ended and Patricia left, Abby entered the room. Noah was in his chair by the window, in the same position he had been left in that morning. Leo had been transferred back to his wheelchair and positioned next to his brother. The two of them stared outside at the property's extensive garden where old trees swayed in the wind. Abby didn't speak to them. Instead, she sat on the floor between the wheelchairs, her back to the window, looking in the same direction as the boys. She stayed there for long minutes, just existing in the same silence they inhabited. Then she took paper and crayons from her worn-out suitcase. She began to draw. She didn't ask if they wanted to see. She didn't narrate what she was doing. She simply drew. Two boys holding hands. Above them she wrote in careful letters, "You are strong." When she finished, she stood up and placed the drawing on the nightstand between the two hospital beds. She said nothing about it. She didn't call attention to it. She just left it there and went out of the room to get the children's dinner from the kitchen. Mrs. Eleanor came in minutes later to check the boys' vitals before their evening meal. She noticed the drawing immediately. She picked it up, examined the simplicity of the lines, the words written with care. She looked at Leo and Noah, expecting the same lack of reaction that had become normal. But something was different. Noah was looking at the nightstand where the paper had been. His eyes weren't vacant, they were focused. For the first time in months, there was something in that gaze beyond emptiness. "Dear God," Mrs. Eleanor whispered, holding the drawing with trembling hands. She ran to find Alfred, who was supervising dinner in the kitchen. "The children reacted," she said out of breath. Noah looked at the drawing. He really looked. Alfred hurried up the stairs, Mrs. Eleanor behind him. When they entered the room, they both stopped. Leo was looking now too. Not at the nightstand, but at the door, as if expecting someone to return. "Impossible," murmured Alfred. Abby returned carrying a tray with the balanced dinner prepared by the cook. Warm vegetable soup, shredded chicken, mashed potatoes. Nutritious but tasteless food, calculated by nutritionists but made without love. She placed the tray on the side table, and for the first time since she had arrived spoke directly to the children. "Good evening, Leo. Good evening, Noah. I've brought your dinner." Her voice was soft, natural, without the exaggerated tone adults sometimes use with children. She spoke to them like people, not patients or projects. Noah turned his head slightly in her direction. It was an almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. Mrs. Eleanor put a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp of surprise. Abby showed no shock or excessive joy. She just smiled gently and began to prepare the meal, helping Mrs. Eleanor position the boys properly. Throughout the process, she murmured quietly, narrating her actions in a comforting way. "Let's adjust your chair, Noah. This way you'll be more comfortable. And you too, Leo, the soup is warm but not too hot. Just the way it needs to be." That night, for the first time, Edward did not stay locked in his office. He went down to the living room and sat in the leather armchair near the fireplace. Alfred found him there an hour later, staring intently at the newly cleaned picture frames. "She cleaned the photographs," Edward said, not as an accusation but as a statement. "Yes, sir. I should have dismissed her for it." "Why didn't you?" Edward didn't answer immediately. He ran a hand over his tired face, feeling the stubble. "I don't know," he finally admitted. Alfred sat in the adjacent armchair, a liberty he would not normally allow himself, but the moment seemed to require it. "Mrs. Eleanor informed me that the children reacted today. Noah looked at a drawing Miss Abigail made. Leo looked at the door." Edward looked up abruptly. "They reacted?" It was subtle, but she's certain. Something has changed. For the first time in months, something akin to hope began to sprout in Edward's chest. It was a small, fragile, almost painful sensation. He immediately pushed it down. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and he couldn't bear another disappointment. "Review the cameras," he ordered, his voice returning to its usual cold tone. "I want to see exactly what happened. Alfred nodded and withdrew. Edward remained in the armchair looking at a specific photograph. Caroline, with the newborn twins, one in each arm, her face radiating a happiness so pure it seemed impossible it had ever been real. But it was real. All of it was real until the moment it wasn't. On the fourth floor, Abby was finishing folding the children's clean clothes. Leo and Noah were already in their hospital beds, ready for sleep. Mrs. Eleanor had done all the necessary checks and had left. Abby walked to the window and watched the city lights in the distance. She touched the locket she wore around her neck, hidden under her simple blouse. Inside it, the worn photo of a smiling girl, her sister Lydia, 15 years younger, eyes full of dreams, a life cut short by an illness the doctors couldn't cure in time. 6 years ago, Abby had held Lydia's hand as she passed, powerless to do anything but be present. Since then, Abby had dedicated her life to being present for other children. She couldn't save Lydia, but she could honor her memory by helping other little souls find light in the darkness. That's why she worked with families in crisis. That's why she took on the cases other professionals rejected. That's why she was here, in this silent mansion, with 2 broken children and a shattered father. She had no illusions that she could fix everything. She didn't believe in instant miracles or magical cures, but she believed in presence. She believed that sometimes healing didn't come from techniques or protocols, but simply from someone deciding to stay when everyone else left. Abby turned back to the beds where Leo and Noah slept. In the darkness of the room, she could barely distinguish their small forms under the blankets. She approached quietly and adjusted Leo's blanket, which had slipped a little. Then she did the same for Noah. "Good night, my dears," she whispered. "Tomorrow is a new day." And for the first time since the tragedy had turned that house into a tomb, someone believed that a new day could actually mean something different. The following week brought subtle changes that only watchful eyes could perceive. Edward reviewed the security camera footage every night, watching and re-watching every moment of the children's day. He saw Abby sit on the floor of the room for hours, simply drawing or folding clothes in silence. He saw Noah's eyes occasionally follow her movements. He saw Leo turn his head slightly when she entered the room. They were microscopic, almost invisible, signs of progress, but they were happening. Mrs. Eleanor began to trust Abby more, allowing her to assist with tasks that were previously exclusive to the nurse. During baths, Abby helped position the boys with a care that went beyond the technical. She spoke softly as she worked, not expecting answers, just offering her voice as company. "Today we're going to use the lavender soap," she would say gently. "It smells so nice. It will leave you smelling fresh all day." Alfred noticed that Abby woke up before dawn. Sometimes he would find her in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, making tea and looking out the window as the city still slept. She never complained about the hours, never showed fatigue. There was a serenity about her that was contagious, even to the most skeptical staff members. In the second week, something unexpected happened. Edward was on a video conference with Marcus, his business partner, discussing the company's expansion into the Mexican market, when Alfred knocked urgently on the office door. The expression on the butler's face made Edward end the meeting abruptly. "What happened?" he asked, standing up quickly, his heart pounding with fear. "Nothing bad, sir," Alfred hurried to say, "but you need to come and see." Edward ran up the stairs to the boys' room. When he opened the door, he found Mrs. Eleanor with tears in her eyes, Patricia, the physical therapist, with her hand over her mouth in shock, and Abby kneeling on the floor between the wheelchairs. Leo had smiled. It was a small, almost ghostly smile, but it was there. Abby was holding a red toy car she had found forgotten under a dresser. It had been Leo's favorite before the accident. She didn't know that. She had simply found it and placed it on the floor near him, and Leo had looked at the toy and smiled. Edward felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the doorframe, unable to process what he was seeing. 6 months. 6 months of renowned therapists, of international experts consulted via video conference, of expensive medical protocols. And this simple woman, with her worn-out coat and calloused hands, had achieved something that all the others had failed to reach. "Leo," Edward whispered, his voice breaking. The boy didn't turn to look at his father. The smile had already vanished. But it had happened. Everyone saw it. Abby stood up slowly, holding the red car. She looked at Edward and nodded respectfully before withdrawing, letting the family have their moment. She understood instinctively that her presence, though responsible for the change, should not dominate the instant. Edward walked over to Leo with trembling steps. He knelt in front of the wheelchair and touched his son's face for the first time in weeks. He had avoided physical contact, unable to bear feeling the boy's immobility, the weight of what was lost. But now he touched him. "My son," he whispered, tears finally escaping. "My little Leo." Leo didn't react, but he didn't pull away either. And for Edward, that was enough. It was an impossible beginning, but it was a beginning. That night, Edward did something he hadn't done in months. He had dinner in the dining room. Not with the children, he wasn't ready for that yet, but in the same room where they used to gather as a family. Alfred served the meal in silence, respecting the moment. In the middle of dinner, Edward called for Abby. She came down the stairs with the same calm as always, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sit," Edward ordered, indicating the chair across from him. Abby hesitated. "That wouldn't be appropriate, sir." "I decide what's appropriate in this house. Sit." She obeyed, maintaining an upright but uncomfortable posture. Edward studied her for long minutes, trying to understand the enigma before him. "What did you do to my son?" he finally asked. "Nothing, sir. I just left a toy near him. 39 professionals tried to stimulate them with toys. None got any reaction." Abby looked down at her hands in her lap. Perhaps they needed someone who didn't expect anything in return. Edward frowned. All the professionals were hired to help them. Yes, but they all arrived with expectations, with plans and protocols and goals. Abby raised her eyes to meet Edward's. The children felt the pressure. They felt they needed to perform, to improve, to be fixed. And that only made them withdraw further. "And you don't have expectations?" "I have only one," Abby said softly, "to be present. The rest is not up to me." Edward leaned back in his chair, processing those words. His analytical mind struggled against the simplicity of the approach. His entire life had been built on goals, plans, measurable results. The idea that the answer could be just presence without expectation was unsettling. "Where did you come from, Abby?" She blinked, surprised by the personal question. "Bakersfield, sir. Is your family still there?" There was a long pause before Abby answered. "I don't have any family left, sir. I lost my sister a few years ago." Edward noticed how she unconsciously touched the locket on her neck. "How did she die?" he asked, then regretted the intrusion. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "She got sick," Abby said simply. "The doctors tried everything, but sometimes there's nothing that can be done." She had to replace the hard word, soften the harsh truth. "She passed away surrounded by love. It was all I could give her." Edward felt something tighten in his chest. "How old was she?" 15. "And you took care of her?" "Until the end." Abby discreetly wiped away a tear that threatened to fall. "I learned that presence is the greatest gift we can give someone. Not miraculous cures, not empty promises. Just being there, unconditionally. That's why you work with children in difficult situations." "That's why I work with forgotten children," Abby corrected gently. "The ones the system has given up on, the ones whose families don't know how to reach anymore. They just need to know that someone cares enough to stay." Edward took a sip of wine, his gaze distant. Caroline would have said something similar. She always believed that medicine was about presence, not just prescriptions. "Your wife was a doctor?" Abby asked, though she already knew the answer from conversations she had overheard among the staff. "A pediatrician." "One of the best." Edward smiled sadly. "She chose to work in underserved communities instead of lucrative private clinics. She said wealth wasn't measured in money, but in lives touched. She sounds like she was a special person." "She was." Edward's voice faltered. "She was everything." Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Abby waited, knowing there were no right words to fill that void. "The accident," Edward began, surprised that he wanted to talk about it. "We went to spend the weekend on Catalina Island. We rented a yacht. Caroline loved the sea. She said the water made her feel free." Abby just listened, her hands quiet in her lap. It was a beautiful day. Bright sun, calm sea. The boys were in life jackets playing on the deck. Caroline was taking pictures. He paused, taking a deep breath. "I was at the helm. I didn't see the other boat until it was too late." "Mr. Sinclair," Abby began softly, "you don't have to—" "They hit us." Edward continued as if she hadn't spoken, needing to expel the poison that consumed him. The impact threw everyone into the water. I managed to grab the boys, but Caroline was trapped. I tried. God knows I tried. But I couldn't save her and hold on to the boys at the same time. Tears were now streaming freely down his face. I chose the boys, and they survived. But the trauma, the lack of oxygen, the shock. The doctors said the paralysis was both physical and psychological. They said they might never fully recover. But they are recovering, Abby said firmly. Leo smiled today. It's a start. A start to what? Edward laughed bitterly. So they can remember what they lost? So they can grow up without their mother? So they can blame me for not saving her? They don't blame you, sir. They're children. They just need to know their father is still here. Edward wiped his face with his hands. You don't understand. I can't look at them without seeing what I did. Without seeing her. Then don't look at the past. Look at them now. Abby leaned forward slightly. Your sons need you. Not the you that was before the accident, but the you that exists now. Imperfect and broken. They need to see that it's okay not to be okay. Edward looked at this simple woman with her disarming wisdom. How long have you been doing this? Working with children? 6 years. 6 years trying to save children you couldn't save when it was your sister. Abby was not offended by the direct observation. Yes, I can't bring Lydia back, but I can honor her life by helping others. Every child who smiles, every family that reconnects, is a way of keeping her memory alive. Edward nodded slowly. Stay, he said finally. Keep doing what you're doing, and if you need anything, resources, equipment, whatever, just ask. I don't need anything, sir, just permission to continue. You have it, Edward said, rising from the table. Abby also stood, bowing respectfully before leaving. When she was gone, Edward remained in the dining room looking at the empty chair where Caroline used to sit. For the first time since the accident, he didn't just feel pain when he looked at that empty space. He felt something else, something small and fragile that he had forgotten how to name. Hope. The following weeks brought transformations that had seemed impossible just a month before. Noah began to make small sounds, almost inaudible whispers, but sounds nonetheless. Leo followed Abby with his eyes whenever she entered the room. Mrs. Eleanor reported that the boys were sleeping better, waking up with fewer nightmares. Patricia, the physical therapist, noticed something extraordinary during the sessions. The boys' muscles were responding better to the exercises. There was strength where before there had only been flaccidity, focus where before there had only been absence. It's inexplicable, she told Edward during an evaluation meeting. The neurological exams show no significant changes, but their behavior contradicts the results. It's as if something inside them has awakened. Edward listened attentively, sitting in his office armchair. Beside him was Marcus, his business partner, who had insisted on visiting the mansion to see for himself the changes Edward had vaguely mentioned during their calls. Marcus Ferreira was a tall, expansive man, the opposite of Edward in temperament. While Edward analyzed numbers, Marcus dealt with people. They had been friends since college, when they co-founded the company that had made them millionaires before they were 30. Man, Marcus said after Patricia left, I have to meet this miracle worker. 39 nannies, and she achieves what no one else could. It's not a miracle, Edward replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. It's just presence. Marcus laughed. Presence? You hired the best professionals in the country, paid fortunes for international consultants, and you're telling me the answer was presence? I can't explain it, Edward admitted, but something about her connects with the boys. Can I meet her? Edward hesitated, then nodded. He was curious to see how Marcus, always so pragmatic, would react to Abby. They found her in the sunroom, a glass-enclosed room on the ground floor that offered a view of the garden. Abby had transformed the space into a makeshift activity area. There were drawings scattered on the floor, crayons in various colors, and in the center, Leo and Noah in their wheelchairs. For the first time, the chairs weren't just parked side by side. They were positioned at opposite ends of the room, and between them, an imaginary line had been drawn with colored tape on the floor. Abby was kneeling beside Noah, her hands gently placed over the boys on the wheels of the chair. Come on, Noah, she said softly. Just one push, you can do it. Noah was breathing hard, his small arms trembling with the effort. Slowly, inch by inch, the chair moved. It was almost imperceptible progress, but it was happening. From the other side of the room, Leo watched intently. His fingers gripped the armrests of his own chair with surprising strength. Edward and Marcus stopped at the door, watching in silence. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but Edward put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Noah reached the middle of the room, where the colored tape marked the finish line. Abby beamed. "You did it, Noah. I'm so proud of you." And then something extraordinary happened. Noah smiled back. It wasn't the shy, fleeting smile that had occasionally appeared in recent weeks. It was a genuine, wide smile that lit up his entire face. "Now it's your turn, Leo," Abby called, walking over to the other boy. Leo looked at her, then at his brother waiting in the center of the room, then back at Abby. His lips moved. No sound came out, but the movement was there. He was trying to speak. Abby knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. "No rush. When you're ready, I'll be here." Leo took a deep breath. His hands tightened on the wheels of his chair, and he pushed. The movement was stronger than Noah's. There was determination there, concentrated will. The chair lurched forward in small bursts, but it moved. Leo was sweating, his face red with effort, but he didn't give up. When he reached Noah, Abby positioned the chairs side by side. The twins looked at each other, and for a moment something passed between them, a silent communication that only brothers share. Noah extended a trembling hand. Leo did the same. Their fingers touched, then intertwined. Edward let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Marcus placed a firm hand on his shoulder, wordless, just a supportive presence. Abby finally noticed the two men at the door. She stood up quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm sorry I didn't hear you arrive." "No, don't be sorry," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "What I just saw was—" "Progress," Marcus completed, extending his hand to Abby. Marcus Ferreira, Edward's partner and a witness to the impossible. Abby shook his hand briefly. "Their pleasure, Mr. Ferreira. The boys are working hard." "Working," Marcus repeated, looking at the twins who were still holding hands. "This looks like a lot more than work." "They wanted to reach each other," Abby explained simply. "So we gave them a reason to try." Edward walked over to his sons and knelt in front of them. Leo and Noah looked at him with eyes that, for the first time in months, seemed to truly see him. "I'm proud of you," Edward whispered, touching both their faces. "So proud." Noah whispered something. It was too low for Edward to understand. He leaned closer. "What was that, son?" Noah tried again, his voice weak but determined. Dad. The word hit Edward like a bolt of lightning. Dad. He hadn't heard that word in 6 months. He thought he would never hear it again. Tears streamed freely down his face as he hugged both boys, careful not to hurt them, but unable to contain himself. Marcus turned away, discreetly wiping his own eyes. Abby remained in the corner of the room, watching the family reunion with a serene smile. This wasn't her moment. It was theirs. Later, while the boys were napping after their morning's exertion, Marcus talked with Edward on the veranda. The gentle Los Angeles breeze carried the scent of approaching rain. "She's special," Marcus said, taking a sip of coffee. "I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about her that goes beyond training or technique. She lost her sister," Edward recounted. "Cared for her until the end. I think that taught her something no course ever could." "Empathy born from pain," Marcus reflected. "It's the deepest kind of all." Edward nodded, looking out at the garden where gardeners worked silently. "Caroline would have liked her." "I think so," Marcus agreed. He hesitated before continuing. "Edward, can I ask you a personal question?" "You can. Are you handling all of this okay, the boys improving, the memories it must bring back?" Edward took a moment to answer. "I don't know. Part of me is euphoric. Seeing my sons come back to life is more than I could have ever hoped for. But another part feels guilty." "Guilty?" "For being happy when Caroline isn't here to see it. For starting to feel hope when she didn't get that chance." Edward paused. "She should be here. She should be the one witnessing this recovery, not me." "She is watching," Marcus said softly, "and I'm sure she's proud of both the boys and you." Edward didn't reply. He wasn't a religious man, never had been, but in that moment he desperately wanted to believe Marcus was right. That afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor sought out Abby in the boys' room. The nurse wore a worried expression that made Abby pause in the middle of folding clean clothes. "I need to tell you something," Mrs. Eleanor began, closing the door. "I overheard Mr. Sinclair talking to his partner. He's considering bringing in a team of certified professional caregivers. Specialists from Los Angeles and even abroad." Abby continued, folding, her hands not trembling. "He has that right. His sons deserve the best." "But you're doing what no one else could," Mrs. Eleanor protested. "The boys trust you." "Maybe they need more than I can offer," Abby said calmly. "If better professionals can help them more, then that's what should happen." Mrs. Eleanor studied the younger woman. "You're not going to fight to stay?" Abby finally stopped folding and looked at the nurse. "My job was never about me, Mrs. Eleanor. It was always about the children. If my leaving is better for Leo and Noah, then I will leave." But the nurse's heart ached as she saw the quiet sadness in Abby's eyes. It was obvious she cared deeply for the boys. And it was obvious that the thought of leaving them hurt. That night, as she put Leo and Noah to bed, Abby sang softly. It was a song her mother used to sing to her and Lydia when they were little, a simple melody about stars and dreams. Noah yawned, his eyes slowly closing. Leo held onto one of Abby's fingers, refusing to let go even as sleep pulled him under. "I'll be here when you wake up," Abby promised, though she didn't know how much longer that promise would be true. From the hallway, Edward watched through the ajar door. He heard the song, saw the tenderness with which she treated his sons, and felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, more frightening. Recognition. Edward's decision was made during a meeting with Patricia and an internationally renowned medical consultant via video conference. Dr. Henry Anderson, a pediatric neurologist based in Boston, reviewed all the reports and footage of the boys' progress. "It's remarkable," Dr. Anderson said, his pixelated image on the large screen in Edward's office. "But progress like this requires a more robust professional structure. I recommend a full multidisciplinary team, a neurologist, physical therapist, occupational therapist, child psychologist, all working together under constant medical supervision." Edward nodded, taking notes. "Cost is not an issue. I understand. I can recommend excellent professionals. Some are even available for temporary relocation." After the call ended, Edward was alone in his office. The decision made logical sense. It was the rational next step. Abby had been useful, extraordinarily useful, but useful wasn't qualified. The boys' progress couldn't depend solely on hope and presence. It needed scientific structure, proven protocols, certified expertise. But when he thought about dismissing Abby, something inside him protested. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the fear that the boys would regress without her. It was the memory of Noah saying "Dad" for the first time in months. It was Leo holding her finger as he fell asleep. Edward picked up the phone and called Marcus. "I'm thinking of bringing in a full professional team," he said without preamble when Marcus answered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And Abby?" "She's done an admirable job, but this can't continue based on hope alone. The boys need real professional care." "Edward," Marcus began carefully, "you've seen her results. 39 professionals failed. She succeeded. She achieved initial progress. But for continuity, I need guarantees that only certified expertise can offer. Or you're scared." "Scared of what?" "That it's working. That the boys are really getting better. That you'll have to start living again instead of just existing." Edward was silent, gripping the phone tightly. "Think carefully before you do something that could harm your sons just because you can't handle hope," Marcus said gently before hanging up. Edward placed the phone on the desk and buried his face in his hands. Marcus was right. He was scared. Scared to believe that things could get better because getting better meant moving on. And moving on felt like a betrayal of Caroline. 2 days later, Abby was in the kitchen helping prepare the boys' lunch when she heard voices in the hallway. She recognized Edward's voice, but there were other voices too, male and female, speaking in professional tones about protocols and schedules. Alfred entered the kitchen, his expression grim. "Miss Abigail, Mr. Sinclair has called a meeting. He would like you to be present." Abby wiped her hands and followed the butler to the living room. There she found Edward sitting in his armchair and 3 people she didn't know. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging around her neck, a younger man carrying a leather briefcase, and an Asian woman with a tablet. "This is Abigail Evans," Edward introduced formally. "She has been working with Leo and Noah for the past few weeks." The older woman extended her hand. Dr. Sylvia Mendez, pediatric neurologist. These are my colleagues, Dr. Philip Ross, physical therapist, and Dr. Keiko Tanaka, child psychologist. We form a multidisciplinary team specializing in complex cases of childhood trauma. Abby shook each of their hands, her stomach tightening. She knew what was coming next. We have been hired to take over the comprehensive treatment of Leo and Noah, Dr. Mendez continued. Mr. Sinclair has briefed us on the remarkable progress you've achieved. Congratulations on your work. Thank you, Abby said calmly. Edward cleared his throat. Abby, you've done an extraordinary job. The boys have responded to you in ways I no longer thought possible, but now they need a more comprehensive professional structure, a certified team that can ensure the continuity of their progress based on proven scientific protocols. I understand, sir. You will be kept on as an assistant, Edward continued, avoiding looking directly at her. You will work under the team's supervision, assisting as needed. Of course, sir, Abby said, though they both knew that wasn't what would happen. The team wouldn't need an unqualified assistant. It was a gentle dismissal, wrapped in polite words. We'd like to observe your routine with the children before we implement our protocols, said Dr. Ross. Could you show us how you work with them? Abby led the team to the room where Leo and Noah were resting after their morning physical therapy. The boys looked curiously at the strangers, their bodies tensing slightly. She approached the wheelchairs and knelt between them. Good morning, my dears. These are some very smart doctors who are going to help you get even stronger. Noah looked at her, then at the strangers, then back at her. His lower lip trembled slightly. It's okay, Abby assured him gently, touching his hand. I'm here. Dr. Mendez made notes on her tablet. Remarkable. They clearly trust her. Edward watched from the door, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For the next hour, Abby demonstrated her routine. The wheelchair races she had turned into games, the drawings she left strategically for the boys to find, the way she sang softly during mundane activities. It all seemed simple, almost simplistic, compared to the complex protocols the medical team had in mind. Interesting, commented Dr. Tanaka. A very informal approach, not very structured, but the results speak for themselves. When the observation was over, Edward asked to speak with Abby in private. They went to the library, a room Abby had never entered. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, many of them related to technology and business, but also a whole section of children's books that Caroline had collected. How you understand why I have to do this? Edward began, finally looking at her. I understand, sir. Your sons deserve the best. You helped them in ways I can't explain, but they need more now. They need professionals who can guarantee measurable progress with proven scientific protocols. Abby quoted his words. I heard you, sir. Edward ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Then why do I feel like I'm making a mistake? Because you're scared, Abby said gently. Scared that the boys will truly get better and you'll have to live again. Edward recoiled as if he'd been struck. You know nothing about me. I know you hide in this office because it's easier to review cameras than to be present with your sons. I know you avoid their gaze because you see Caroline in them. I know you're so trapped in what you lost that you can't see what you still have. His voice came out icy. You're dismissed. Pack your things and be out by the end of the day. Abby nodded calmly. As you wish, sir. May I say goodbye to the children? No, it will be easier this way. The team starts tomorrow and I don't want to confuse them with goodbyes. Abby turned to leave but paused at the door. Mr. Sinclair, your sons don't need perfect protocols. They need their father, not the scientific versions of love you hire to replace real presence. Get out, Edward ordered, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. Abby left. She went up to the room she had occupied for the past few weeks, a small but comfortable suite adjacent to the boys' room. She began to pack her worn-out suitcase, folding each piece of clothing with the same care she always showed. Mrs. Eleanor found her like that, silent tears streaming down her face as she packed her few belongings. No, the nurse whispered. He can't be doing this. He can and he is, Abby said, wiping her face. It's his choice. But the boys, they'll be fine. They're strong. They'll miss you. They'll think you abandoned them. Abby paused, those words hitting her with force. She hadn't thought of that. For Leo and Noah, who had already lost so much, her departure would be another abandonment. More proof that the people they love disappear. I need to see them, Abby said suddenly. Just for a moment, to say goodbye properly. Mr. Sinclair forbade it. Then he doesn't need to know. Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. The new team is in a meeting with him in the office. You have maybe 10 minutes. Abby went down the stairs silently and entered the boys' room. Leo and Noah were in their chairs by the window, watching the gardeners prune rose bushes. When the door opened, they both turned immediately, their faces lighting up when they saw her. Abby knelt between them, taking a hand of each. She needed to find words that could explain the inexplicable to 4-year-old minds. "My dears," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "I have to go away for a little while." Noah's smile vanished. Leo squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "But I want you to know it's not because I don't love you. I love you so much. You are the bravest boys I've ever known." She wiped away a tear. "You're going to have some very good doctors taking care of you now. They're going to help you get even stronger." "No," Noah whispered, the word coming out clearly for the first time. "Don't go." Abby's heart broke. "I have to, my love, but I will always remember you. And I want you to remember one very important thing." Leo looked at her with eyes full of unshed tears. "You are strong, you can do this. And your father loves you very much, even when he doesn't know how to show it." She kissed each of them on the forehead, memorizing their faces, their scents, everything she could hold on to. Then she stood up and left before her courage failed her. Leo and Noah stared at the closed door, slowly understanding that she wasn't coming back. And for the first time since the accident, they both began to cry. Not silent tears, but loud, desperate sobs that echoed through the mansion's corridors. The boys' crying interrupted the meeting in the office. Edward shot to his feet, his heart racing. In the 6 months since the accident, he had heard many sounds from that room. Silence mostly, occasionally moans during nightmares. But never crying like this, so loud, so desperate, so alive. He ran up the stairs, the medical team behind him. When he opened the door to the room, he found Leo and Noah in their chairs, tears streaming down their faces, their small bodies shaking with sobs. Mrs. Eleanor was trying to comfort them, but the boys were unresponsive. They just cried and looked at the door, as if expecting someone to return. "What happened?" Edward demanded, kneeling in front of his sons. "They saw Miss Abigail," Mrs. Eleanor admitted, guilt evident in her voice. "She came to say goodbye." "I ordered her not to," Edward roared. "And I disobeyed, sir," the nurse said firmly. "The children deserved a goodbye." Edward looked at his crying sons, really crying, and something inside him broke. It wasn't anger, it was understanding. They weren't crying because they were in physical pain. They were crying because they were feeling. For the first time in months, they were expressing real, deep, undeniable emotion. "They're back," he whispered, touching their wet faces. "My boys are back." Dr. Mendez watched, fascinated. "Remarkable. They are demonstrating full emotional capacity. This is an extraordinary breakthrough." But Edward barely heard her. He hugged both his sons, letting them cry on his shoulders, finally allowing himself to be fully present for them. "It's okay," he whispered. "Daddy's here." "Daddy's here?" After the sobs subsided to softer hiccups, Edward looked at Mrs. Eleanor. "Where is she now?" "Packing her things, sir. She must be almost finished." Edward stood up, his decision clear. "Stay with them," he ordered the medical team. "I'll be right back." He found Abby at the front door, suitcase in hand, waiting for the taxi Alfred had called. The rain had started, a fine cold drizzle typical of Los Angeles. She was wearing her worn-out coat, staring at the wet street, waiting. "Stop," Edward said, coming down the last few steps quickly. Abby turned, surprised. "Mr. Sinclair, you don't have to—" "I was wrong," he interrupted. "About everything. About what my sons need. About what I need. Sir—" "They cried," Edward said, his voice breaking. "For the first time in 6 months, they really cried. They felt something so deep they couldn't contain it. And it was because you were gone." Abby set her suitcase down, her eyes welling up. "You weren't just healing them," Edward continued, moving closer. "You were healing me too, forcing me to see that hiding behind protocols and certified professionals was just another way of running away, of not having to be truly present. Your sons just need you," Abby said softly. "Just you, as imperfect and broken as you are." They need both of us, Edward corrected. They need you, Abby. He hesitated, raw vulnerability on his face. And I think I do too. The taxi honked at the gate. Abby looked at the car, then at Edward, then at the mansion where 2 children needed her. Cancel the taxi, she said finally. The relief that flooded Edward's face was palpable. He took her suitcase and led her back inside. Alfred watched from the door with a discreet smile, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself in months. When Abby entered the boys' room, Leo and Noah reacted immediately. Their faces lit up, their arms reaching out for her. She ran and hugged them, all 3 of them crying now, but they were tears of relief, of reunion, of hope. "I'm sorry," Abby whispered. "I'm not leaving again, I promise." Edward watched from the door, the medical team beside him. Dr. Mendez was jotting down observations on her tablet, but there was something different in her expression now, less clinical, more human. "Mr. Sinclair," she said softly, "I think I understand now why all the others failed. They tried to heal with technique. She heals with presence. And that," she looked at Abby with the boys, "is something no protocol can replicate." "So what do you recommend?" Edward asked. "That she stays," said Dr. Ross. "That she continues doing what she's been doing. And we will work around her, complementing her work with medical support when needed. You're willing to do that?" "If we want these children to continue improving, we have no choice," said Dr. Tanaka. "She has something we don't, their trust. And in cases of trauma, trust is as important as any therapy." Edward nodded, feeling for the first time that he had made the right decision. The following days brought a new dynamic. The medical team implemented protocols, but always in consultation with Abby, always respecting the bond she had built with the boys. Patricia, the original physical therapist, worked alongside Dr. Ross. Mrs. Eleanor coordinated with Dr. Mendez, and Abby remained at the center of it all, the constant that gave the boys the security to try. And they tried. God, how they tried. Leo started talking more, single words at first, then short sentences. Noah followed, his voice softer but just as determined. The physical therapy sessions intensified, and the boys responded beyond all medical expectations. "There's no neurological explanation for this progress," Dr. Mendez admitted during a weekly review. "The scans show some improvement, but not enough to justify the behavioral leap. It's as if their will is overcoming their physical limitations." "Willpower is underrated in medicine," Edward commented, looking out the window at the garden where Abby had organized another wheelchair race. "It's something you can't measure on a scan, but it's real all the same." 2 weeks after Abby's near departure, something extraordinary happened. It was a Saturday morning, the sun finally breaking through the persistent Los Angeles clouds. Edward was in his office, but for the first time in months he wasn't reviewing cameras or business reports. He was looking at old photographs, allowing himself to remember without paralyzing pain. Abby entered without knocking, something she would never normally do. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Mr. Sinclair, you need to come. Now." Edward ran after her, his heart pounding with fear. When he reached the boys' room, he found the entire medical team there. Mrs. Eleanor with her hands over her mouth, Alfred with tears in his eyes. And in the center of the room, something impossible. Leo was standing, not in a wheelchair, not propped up by equipment, standing with orthopedic braces on his lower limbs, holding onto the parallel bars that Dr. Ross had installed for therapy. His face was red with effort, sweat dripping, but he was standing. Noah was beside him, still in his chair, but with his hands on the bars too, trying to pull himself up. "Dad," Leo said, his voice clear for the first time. "Look." Edward walked slowly, almost in a trance. He knelt in front of his son, touching his face with trembling hands. "How?" "Abby helped," Leo explained. "We practiced. Every night." It was a secret. Abby was in the corner, tears streaming freely. "They wanted to surprise you. We started a week ago, just a few seconds at a time. I didn't know they'd manage it today." Edward looked at her, then at his standing son, then at Noah, who was determined to join his brother. Something inside him, something that had been buried for 6 months, was finally resurrected. It was hope. True hope, not the fragile, frightened version he had felt before, but solid hope, grounded in the impossible happening before his eyes. He hugged Leo, careful not to unbalance him. Then he turned to Noah, and helped him stand up too. With his support on one side and Abby's on the other, Noah managed to stand beside his brother. The twins looked at each other, standing for the first time since the accident, and they smiled. Not shy or hesitant smiles, but wide, genuine smiles of pure joy. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Eleanor was crying openly. Alfred discreetly wiped his eyes. The medical team was taking pictures and making frantic notes. And Edward, for the first time since he lost Caroline, allowed himself to feel not just pain when he looked at his sons, but immense pride and undeniable love. That night, something happened that hadn't happened in 6 months. The family ate dinner together. Edward had Alfred set the dining room table. Not the formal table where they used to entertain guests, but the smaller table in the breakfast nook where they used to have casual meals. Leo and Noah were positioned in adapted chairs, but they were at the table, part of the family again. Abby hesitated when Edward insisted she join them too. "It wouldn't be appropriate, sir." "Abby," Edward said firmly, "you are part of this family now." "Sit," she obeyed, sitting between the boys. The meal was simple, prepared by the cook, but served by Alfred with special ceremony: roast chicken, rice, beans, salad. Homemade, comfortable, American food. Leo tried to hold his fork by himself. His hands trembled, but he tried. Noah watched him and did the same. They both managed to bring food to their mouths without help, an achievement that 6 months ago had seemed impossible. Edward watched his sons, really saw them, for the first time in a long time. He saw not the children broken by trauma, but the strong boys who were rebuilding themselves piece by piece. "Caroline would be proud," he said suddenly, surprising himself by speaking her name aloud. Leo and Noah looked at him. "Mommy," Noah said, testing the word. "Yes," Edward confirmed, his voice thick but firm. "Your mommy would be so proud of you, so proud of how brave and strong you are." 3 months passed since that night. 3 months of constant progress, of small victories that accumulated into an impossible transformation. Leo and Noah now walked with orthopedic braces, their steps still uncertain but determined. They spoke in full sentences, laughed frequently, and occasionally fought like normal brothers. The mansion had changed too. It was no longer the silent tomb Edward had created after the tragedy. Music played in the hallways. Laughter echoed from the garden where the boys played under supervision. The heavy curtains had been opened, letting sunlight flood the rooms that had remained in shadow. Edward had also changed. He returned to work regularly, but no longer buried himself in the office. He had dinner with his sons every night. He read to them before bed. He was present in ways he couldn't be before when the ghost of Caroline paralyzed him. Abby remained no longer as an employee, but as something undefined and essential. She was part of the daily routine, the constant that gave the boys security, but she was also more than that, though no one spoke openly about what exactly she meant. Edward began to notice small things, how his heart sped up when he heard her singing to the boys, how he instinctively looked for her when he entered a room, how simple conversations with her about the boys' day would stretch for hours, evolving into discussions about everything and nothing. Marcus noticed during a visit. "You're in love with her," he said bluntly as they had coffee on the veranda. Edward almost choked. "What? No, she works here. She's the reason your sons are alive again." And Marcus observed his friend with a knowing look. "The reason you're alive again too." Edward didn't reply, but he didn't deny it. "Caroline wouldn't be angry, you know," Marcus continued gently. "She loved you. She wanted you to be happy. You. And I know she would love Abby for saving you all. I can't just move on as if she never existed. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring her memory by living fully, not just existing. Caroline would hate to see you punishing yourself forever." Edward knew Marcus was right, but knowing and feeling were different things. Feeling attracted to Abby felt like a betrayal, even as he recognized the logical absurdity of that thought. That afternoon, something happened that forced everything to the surface. Edward was in his office when he heard excited voices from the garden. He looked out the window and saw Leo and Noah walking, not with orthopedic braces, just walking, leaning on each other but walking without mechanical support. He ran down the stairs, through the house, and burst out into the garden. The boys saw their father and smiled, letting go of each other to walk independently toward him. Their steps were clumsy, stumbling occasionally, but they were real steps. "Dad!" Leo yelled. "We're walking!" Edward fell to his knees when they reached him, hugging them both tightly. "Impossible," he whispered against their hair. "Impossible." Abby watched from nearby, ready to intervene if needed, but giving the family their moment. Mrs. Eleanor stood beside her, crying with joy. The medical team had been called and was documenting everything frantically. "How?" Edward asked, looking at Abby through tears. "The doctors said the paralysis was physical and psychological," Dr. Mendez completed, approaching. "And apparently, both were reversible with appropriate treatment, unconditional love, and—" She looked at Abby. "Constant presence. It's extraordinary. I'll be writing papers on this case for years." But Edward barely heard her. He was absorbed in his sons, these miracle boys who had fought against impossibilities and won. That night, after the boys were put to bed, exhausted but happy, Edward found Abby in the library. She was looking at the children's books Caroline had collected, her fingers gently tracing the spines. "She would have loved to see this," Edward said, entering the room. Abby turned, surprised. "Mr. Sinclair, I thought you had already retired for the night." "Edward," he corrected, "I think we're past the time for formalities." Abby smiled slightly. "Edward, then." He moved closer, stopping at a respectable distance. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my sons, you saved me. They saved themselves. I was just present. Presence is everything," Edward said, echoing her words from months ago. "I learned that from you." A comfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Edward gathered the courage to say what had been in his heart for weeks. "Abby, when you came here I was dead inside, functioning but not living. You showed me that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the present, that it's possible to feel pain and hope simultaneously, that it's possible to move forward without forgetting." "Edward, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted quickly. "I just need you to know that you mean so much to me, to all of us, and that if you ever want to leave to build your own life, even though it would break my heart, I would understand." Abby studied him with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Do you think I want to leave?" "I don't know what you want." "I want to stay," she said simply, "not out of obligation or for a job, but because this house has become my home. These boys have become my boys. And you—" She hesitated, a rare vulnerability crossing her face. "You've become important to me too." Edward's heart soared. "Abby," she held up a hand, stopping him. "But I understand if this is complicated. If I'm just a reminder of a difficult time you'd rather move past." "You're not a reminder of pain," Edward said, stepping closer. "You're a reminder of healing, of hope, of possibility." He took her hands, calloused and strong, hands that had cared for his sons with infinite tenderness. "It's too soon," he admitted, "too complicated. But I want to try, if you're willing." Abby smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I am," she whispered. Edward pulled her into a hug, simple and comforting. It wasn't romantic yet, not completely, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that something was growing between them, something built on a foundation of shared experience, mutual respect, and love for the same extraordinary boys. The following months brought more changes. Edward started a foundation in Caroline's memory, focused on providing medical care and emotional support to families dealing with childhood trauma. The foundation's first initiative was to hire Abby as a lead consultant, using her experience to train other caregivers in the approach of presence over rigid protocols. Leo and Noah continued to improve. They started preschool, making friends, living the normal lives of children. Yes, they still had regular physical therapy. Yes, there were still hard days when the trauma resurfaced. But they were the exceptions now, not the rule. Edward learned to balance his work with family life. Marcus took on more operational responsibilities, allowing Edward to be more present. And slowly, gradually, the mansion in Bel Air became a home again. Abby never packed her suitcase again. She remained, no longer in the adjacent staff room, but eventually, when everyone was ready, in a room of her own closer to the family. Her presence was as natural as air, essential and irreplaceable. A year after her arrival, on a sunny Saturday, the family did something Edward had avoided since the accident. They visited the sea. Not Catalina Island, It would be too soon, perhaps it always would be. But a quiet beach on the northern coast, where Carolyn had never been, where there were no painful memories just waiting to resurface. Leo and Noah ran on the sand, their steps now firm and confident. They laughed as the waves washed over their feet. Edward watched them, Abby by his side, and for the first time since the tragedy he could look at the ocean and see not just loss, but beauty as well. "Thank you," he said softly, taking Abby's hand. She laced her fingers through his. "For what?" "For teaching me that presence heals, that love isn't finite, that it's possible to honor the past while building a future." Abby smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You taught me too, that I can't save everyone, but I can be present for those who cross my path. And sometimes that's enough." Leo and Noah ran up to them, sand clinging everywhere, wide smiles on their faces. "Dad, Abby, come play," they shouted. Edward looked at Abby, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling. And then, for the first time in a long time, Edward allowed himself to simply play. He didn't think about the past. He didn't worry about the future. He just existed in that present moment with his sons and the woman who had saved them all by simply deciding to stay when everyone else had left. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The family walked back to the car, exhausted but happy. Leo and Noah fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, their heads resting on each other. Edward drove, one hand on the wheel, the other holding Abby's. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his peacefully sleeping sons and felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude. Life wasn't perfect. The trauma hadn't completely vanished. The pain of losing Caroline would never fully go away. But they had learned to carry that pain while still living fully. They had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but integrating the loss into who you become. And they had learned, above all, that sometimes grace doesn't arrive in dramatic or miraculous forms. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a woman with a worn-out suitcase and calloused hands, who simply decides to stay. And by staying, she transforms the impossible into reality, despair into hope, and a haunted house into a living home once more. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Leo, Noah, and Abby has touched your hearts deeply. This journey of pain, healing, and love reminds us that authentic presence can transform lives in ways that protocols and techniques never can. If this story resonated with you, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of the human experience. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate resilience, love, and the extraordinary ability of the human spirit to heal even in the most impossible circumstances. Share your reflections in the comments below, your own stories of healing, or simply tell us what you felt. Every comment, every like, every subscription motivates us to continue bringing these narratives that remind us of our shared humanity. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to meeting you again in another moving story. See you soon.